Well, thank you, Rosalind. Really, it's just a great moment to acknowledge the collaboration between all of the civil society partners that have brought this event together, including CIVICUS, Forus, Action for Sustainable Development, GCAP, and the NGO Major Group. This is a session very much as a workshop, as Clara has just mentioned. Normally, we would be meeting in person in the church center, as we have done in previous years, in the weekend during the Hlpf, but we've now adapted this to a virtual format to give you a chance to feedback and to reflect with us before the main Hlpf events take place, and also briefly at the end after the workshops. So we're really glad to work with all of you, and I'm very, very pleased that Rosalind has agreed to moderate the session, who's one of our facilitation group members. So Rosalind, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oli, and to all of us. And we welcome you to this opening session of a high-level political forum for 2021. And as we prepare for the main sessions over the coming 2 weeks, we are aiming to come together to share some key demands and aspirations for the coming sessions, considering the themes of the high-level political forum and the best practices on voluntary national reports. We will have an opening keynote followed by two panel discussions, and then we will break out into groups to share our experiences of national engagement. I'm now delighted to introduce our first speaker, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Denmark to UN. And before she comes in, I would like just to highlight who she is. And she is Ambassador Marie Louise. I may not be able to pronounce the second name, who took her position as the Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations in New York on the 1st of 2019. Marie-Louise has previously worked in a range of leading positions in the Danish Foreign Service, mostly recently as deputy in the Office of Humanitarian Action, Migration and Civil Society from 2016 to 2019, as a Deputy Permanent Representative of Denmark to the United Nations in Geneva from 2012 to 2016. In addition, Marie-Louise has previously served as the head of the ministry's Global Green Growth Secretariat. Welcome, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. And also thanks to Oli and Clara for organizing, and Clara, I'm deeply envious of your language skills. I will be sticking to English. Can you all see me? Because I just have the opening screen in front of me. Can you hear me and see me? Yes. Good.
I think it seems that the camera might have just flipped the other way for a second.
All right. All right, let me see if I can fix that. How on earth did that happen? Okay, wait. Here I am. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, very happy to be with you here today to introduce this conversation on ways to ensure greater inclusion of civil society in UN processes, and how to bring this agenda forward together. And let me start by simply recalling for our discussion these three opening words of the UN Charter, which are we the peoples, not we the states, but we the peoples. And this is really how Denmark, we approach our work here at the UN, always keeping in mind that we need inclusion, we need meaningful participation of all stakeholders to to achieve the best, the most sustainable, and the most just outcomes of really pretty much any endeavor here in the UN, but including the biggest one of all, namely to strive for a sustainable and peaceful world. But unfortunately, this is not a given to all. So we need constantly to protect and promote the idea of allowing civil society to participate and to contribute. And this is an agenda that Denmark has been very committed to for a long time. We remain committed to it. We are continuously engaging with the UN, with member states, with the civil society, to not only keep this issue at the forefront, but also to advance it step by step. And very importantly, this is an ambition that is shared by the highest level in the UN. With his call to action for human rights last year, the Secretary General reaffirmed the UN's commitment to protect and promote civic space, reiterating it as an essential prerequisite for sustainable development, safeguarding peace and security, and protecting human rights. And later that year, as you know, followed the UN guidance note on civic space. So there is a focus on the importance of doubling down on efforts to ensure civil society engagement within the United States nations that we build on. The Secretary General's call to action and also the experiences we had over the last 1.5 years with virtual working methods has given us an occasion to reflect on how policies and practices on participation of and partnership with civil society can be strengthened. And so for the past year, we have teamed up with our friends from very good friends from the mission of Costa Rica and some very good civil society partners, including our co-host here today, Action for Sustainable Development, Forus and CIVICUS, to discuss and host a number of events on meaningful civil society participation to really allow member states, civil society, and the UN to get together and discuss best practices and concrete opportunities for engagement in UN processes more broadly. Basically ways in which, as we've called it, we can unmute civil society. And guided by these discussions, we, in the beginning of this year, we finalized a number of recommendations for enhancing meaningful civil society participation in UN processes. These recommendations are elaborated by Costa Rica and Denmark, but with the support of UN foundations, CIVICUS, Global Focus, Action for Sustainable Development, Forus, and Action Aid International. We managed to get the endorsement for these recommendations of more than 50 UN member states and more than 260 civil society organizations before we, in May, shared the recommendations with the UN Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The letter and recommendations will be circulated as a document of the 75th session of the General Assembly on the agenda item on revitalization of the work of the General Assembly. And these recommendations, they point towards the need to maximize the opportunities and advantages of digitalization to promote meaningful and broader inclusion, to break down digital barriers and considers the possibilities of an annual civil society day, as well as the establishment of an envoy for civil society along the lines of the envoy on youth. Now, this is one of several steps to be taken. We are at the same time continuously seeking other ways as member states to ensure advancement on this issue. As part of our effort to sort of speak unmute civil society, last year we co-led an initiative to ensure meaningful civil society participation in a virtual high-level political forum, and we co-hosted a virtual high-level side event at the UN General Assembly on this topic. And then we also continue at a bilateral level to do what we can to include civil society in UN processes. So in this year's UN Commission on the Status of Women, for instance, and now during Hlpf, Denmark has given civil society one of our 2 allocated seats in the official program, as well as in the negotiations. And allow me just to dwell, since now we are at the Hlpf, to dwell a little bit on the Hlpf, where, as you know, Denmark is presenting our VNR this year. This is the 2nd Danish VNR, and it's been a very collaborative and inclusive process this time around. This VNR report is really not just the government's report, it's also the report of civil society and stakeholders across the board. And that's why you'll see that civil society findings and assessments have not just been taken into consideration, but they're actually featured in the report itself. And basically, this has to do with the realization or the acknowledgement in Denmark that we cannot achieve the 2030 agenda if we do not engage all parts of society. And obviously, government, we have a very big role to play, but without civil engagement, we'll never get all the way. Also, the Danish Hlpf delegation, it consists of more than 50% civil society and youth representatives. We share speaking time at high-level events when we can. We have given a seat to civil society during the ministerial declaration negotiations. And just 2 days ago, we had a virtual pre-launch of our VNR report together with Norway, where civil society was given the platform to give their honest opinion on the process and also the way ahead and of course the report itself. And then also mention we will feature civil society on our social media accounts during Hlpf as a way to raise awareness. Under the unmute hashtag, we highlight ways that we as a UN member state work to include civil society and encourage other member states as well as civil society to highlight best practices and keep the conversation going, basically. So please keep using the hashtag to help us raise awareness. Now we of course do all these things as Denmark bilaterally because we think they're right. They add value. It's valuable to us, and we get better processes and better results. But of course, it's also when we highlight it and so much, it's also to demonstrate that we would like the UN as a whole to do more of it. Let me just finally say a few words on the ministerial declaration. We had a very strong zero draft, and we were happy to see, human rights references, language on gender, civil society, youth, adolescence, diversity. We had a very good paragraph on climate and biodiversity. And a strong zero draft that's really, really important for where we start in the negotiations. Then when we enter into the negotiations, obviously, we expect and we see, and this is also the case this time, that some of the strong references will be weakened in the process. And that has unfortunately also been the case with language related to civil society, gender equality, and on human rights. But we also in the situation where we had the negotiations last year falling apart. You have a pandemic that's still hanging as a heavy and dark shadow over the world. So we really don't want to send send a signal to the world this year that we cannot agree on the 2030 agenda. So it is really important to ensure the adoption this year of a ministerial declaration, and just be assured that we will, together with our civil society partners, work very, very hard to see a text that is as ambitious and progressive as possible. We in conclusion, we look forward to walk the talk with you to advance civic space. You can count on Denmark, and I look very much forward to listening to or hearing about the conversation you will have here today. I'm sad that I can't stay, but I have to run to another meeting. That's the plight of the DPR. But my good colleague Rebecca will stay with you and make sure that you unmute, so to speak. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for giving us that opening remarks, and we are so grateful for the support being provided to civil society engagement from governments such as yours. We do really appreciate. Thank you very much. For now, we will now hear from a number of key partners on their priorities from civil society engagement and advocacy at the high-level political forum. And the first panel will be around building a more inclusive 2030, expectations from the high-level political forum 2021. And the first speaker will be talking about ideas for better civil society engagement at the UN. And we are welcoming Madip Tiwana from CIVICUS. And Tiwana is the Chief Program Officer at CIVICUS, the Global Civil Society Alliance. He specializes in legislation related to the core civil society, freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. Since joining CIVICUS in 2008, I will use the second name, Tiwana, has engaged in efforts to advance civil society participation in decision-making and to protect the civil society freedoms globally. He is currently overseeing CIVICUS's portfolio of work on defending civic freedoms and protecting democratic values. Welcome, Tiwana. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Rosalind, and great to see so many familiar faces and colleagues we've been working with over the years. And thanks, Ollie, and Action for Sustainable Development colleagues, Clara and colleagues from Forus and GCAP for organizing this. So it was great to hear Ambassador Vector speak, and it's good that I can pick up from where she left off. Agenda 2030 arguably is the greatest ever human endeavor undertaken to create just, equal, and sustainable societies. It's something that civil society fought long and hard for. I mean, many of us were involved in the negotiations, and what's amazing about this agenda is that it's holistic, it's rights-based, and it covers, a wide range of civil society concerns and contemporary issues of our times. The challenge, of course, lies in the fact that this agenda is not always taken holistically, and there are many governments that pick up little bits of the agenda and impede civil society's ability to act as equal partners in the achievement of this agenda. Now, there are commitments in Agenda 2030 which are particularly relevant to civil society. These are commitments on inclusive, representative, and participatory decision-making. There are commitments on access to information and fundamental freedoms. And importantly, there are commitments on effective civil society partnerships. These commitments are included in goals 16 and 17, but we can also find other commitments that support civil society's work in all of the 17 goals. Now, despite these challenges, according to our research at CIVICUS, 87% of the world's population live in countries where the core civil society freedoms of expression, association, and peaceful assembly remain seriously constrained. And civil society groups are facing different kinds of challenges from various actors, including repressive state apparatuses, including criminal elements in the private sector, certain businesses that don't, subscribe to democratic inclusive principles, and from the rise of anti-rights groups, that is, groups that promote ideologies of exclusion and hate that are inimical to civil society's commitment to promote rights and justice. With all of these challenges, I think we believe that to protect civic space remains a key imperative of our times at this moment. And we are seeing that Agenda 2030 is being stymied by the fact that there's not enough avenues for civil society participation, and also because of civil society space being constrained, because civil society is not able to ensure accountability in Agenda 2030. And thus we are calling for more spaces for civil society to participate in the high-level political forum, including voluntary national reviews. I know that Sarah Brandt will be speaking about this later, and for us to leverage the power of online technology. And also when we go back to normal ways of working, the visa processes remain big challenges for civil society participation. That's something we have to address. Now, this year's Hlpf is also happening in the run-up to the UNGA, the General Assembly, where the Secretary General of the UN will be presenting our common agenda report, which follows up from the UN at 75 celebrations that happened last year. So the UN Charter begins with the words "Be the People's," but as we know that civic space and civil society participation and people's participation in the UN remain deeply constrained. So CIVICUS, along with several other organizations, as part of the We the People's campaign, is asking for 3 key issues to be put on the table and included in the Secretary General's report to make progress on participation of civil society. The first of this is a high-level civil society envoy. This office could be created within the UN headquarters. The idea of this office is really to look at the asymmetric participation across UN offices, agencies, departments with regards to civil society. We know that some UN agencies do very well in involving civil society. We know that some forums do very well, but there are other forums where civil society participation remains a huge challenge. So the idea of this office is really to act as an enabler. It's not to hoover up all or block or take up all of the civil society participation and concentrate it in one office, but actually to work across the UN departments to ensure that all UN agencies and departments and offices are actually enabling civil society participation. They are able to realize the guidelines on civic space that the UN Secretary General put in place last year. They are able to realize the principles that were there in the Secretary General's brief on COVID-19 and human rights, which talks about sustainable development and civic space being interlinked. We can speak more about the idea of the civil society and why, in the conversation. I'm mindful of time. The second idea that we are pushing for is the idea of a World Citizens Initiative. There is a European Citizens Initiative where a critical mass of citizens can bring an issue for the European Union's consideration. We have seen over the last 10 years that there have been conflicts. There have been conflicts in Syria, in Gaza, in Sahel. There's been persecution of people in Myanmar and elsewhere, and the UN Security Council and the UN system oftentimes has appeared to be powerless in this place, despite citizens' demands for resolution. So we are urging that a UN World Citizens Initiative is established, where citizens can bring an issue and urge the UN General Assembly and the Security Council to take action on a matter of concern to civil society. The third issue is a parliamentary assembly. A lot of the state representation, a lot of the state participation that happens at the UN is state-centric. So you have representatives of states, but civil society has limited avenues of participation, and people have limited access to the UN's workings. So we are hoping that through a process of direct representation of people through a parliamentary assembly, we can have another avenue of people's participation. Importantly, there was a commitment in the declaration to commemorate 75 years of the UN, which said that to upgrade the UN, and we are hoping that these three ideas can help the UN upgrade itself, and the UN is able to imagine a more contemporary and inclusive future that includes peoples and civil society organizations across the world.
Thank you very much. All on to the next speaker. I will not read her bio because of time, and please keep your presentation for only 6 minutes. And we are welcoming the next speaker, Bena Pelikana from GCAP, who will be speaking around social justice and leaving no woman behind. And she's also representing national campaign on Dalit human rights. Welcome.
Thank you, Rosaline, and thank you, A4SD, for this opportunity. I'm really happy to be here and see so many of us, at least virtually. We should have been in New York if it was not for the COVID. But really happy for this opportunity. When the member states signed the deal or sealed the deal in the Agenda 2030, one of the most clear and loud messages that they wanted to tell the world was that to leave no one behind. Here we are after almost 6 years of the agenda being in force, made more complex and compounded by the pandemic. We find ourselves asking the same question. Are we really looking at the furthest behind? My role here would be just to bring out some ground level experiences, specifically looking at the most marginalized groups, communities discriminated by work and descent, women within these communities. It could be the Dalit communities, it could be communities who are affected by modern slavery or traditional forms of slavery. COVID-19 has unearthed the epidemic of embedded inequalities in the world. Like any disaster, it has only worsened the pre-existing vulnerabilities and further marginalized the discriminated communities. It overwhelmed the government's capacity to respond to this rare and unforeseen public health disaster. Not to mention the psychological and the economic impact was felt, and we are still feeling it globally, more so in the lower income countries. But if we look at the women from the communities discriminated by work and descent, they're made vulnerable because of her caste or her social location, because of her class and her gender. These identities cause them to become greatly vulnerable and stigmatized, more so than other women. The pre-existing vulnerabilities accentuate the risks to lives, and within this, many other intersectionalities. If we look at disability, if we look at trans, single women, elderly, and it's words off for these different intersectionalities within these women. Post-lockdown, the government provided immediate relief in terms of cash. Many countries had cash as schemes that were distributing direct benefit transfers in kind, and also some social protection flows following the lockdown. However, there was inadequate relief assistance, low realization of entitlement, specifically for communities who are discriminated based on work and descent. And of course, violence against women from these communities continued unabated. I'll just give a few examples from a few of the countries that we looked at. For example, in Nepal, 42% of Dalits live below the poverty line. The pandemic robbed them of their source of income. So they lost their livelihood. But apart from that, because they had no source of income, many of these women were left without having difficulty due to food scarcity. The relief packages could not be easily accessed by the communities due to the distance of their settlements and uneven dissemination of timely information. If we look at India, 65% of the single widow women households were not registered under the schemes that were providing free testing and treatment. That's 65%. 68% of, again, single widow women from these communities were not given the free gas refill that was promised by the government. I can go on and on like this with data. I'm not going too much into the data, but also looking at some of the Roma women, who are the undocumented migrant women or adolescents, transgender and women within these communities. For example, in Bulgaria, Romania, and Serbia, projects supporting the sexual and reproductive health of Roma girls and women have been suspended. And of course, along with this, hate speech, discrimination, and stigmatization. So what do we want? What is it? What are our demands? I'll just say 2 lines about vaccination and then come to what is it that we would like to see. For example, in India, the vaccination program itself is a barrier to access it for many individuals, because to be able to get vaccination, you have to register either through a smartphone or through having a computer. And many of the communities from the DWD communities do not have access to technology. And so it becomes that much more difficult for them to access vaccination programs. Many of them are away from, they're in either semi-urban or rural, where they do not have, or in faraway locations where they do not have, access to the health services or hospital and can go to hospitals. Therefore, some of our demands specific to vaccination is that ensure free vaccination to all the communities marginalized due to work and dissent, and of course, doorstep vaccination to all people with disabilities, elderly and others. Our overall demand has always been and will be that when we talk about leave no one behind, we hope that we center the discourse both in policy as well as implementation on the fact that there are women within these communities or trans communities or people with disabilities within the communities discriminated by work and dissent who are farthest left behind. And we hope that we will take these communities as the center of our discourse. Thank you.
Rosaline, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Bena, for those very insightful, points you have raised. And now we would want to welcome the pronunciation of these names are big. Dedrade Baka to come and talk to us around how to improve partnership working in the 2030 agenda. Please welcome. I won't read your bio because of time. 6 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rosaline. And I have some slides, which if they could be displayed, that's great. So thanks very much. And hello, everybody. My name is Deirdre de Burka, and I'm the Advocacy Coordinator of Forus. And I think many of you know this is a global civil society network. It's made up of 69 national development platforms and 7 regional coalitions. And I know many Forus members are participating in this forum today. So I've been asked to speak about the topic of how to improve partnership working in the 2030 agenda. And as Forus, we're very happy to do this as we do concentrate on SDG 16 and 17 in our 2030 agenda advocacy work. And SDG 17, as we know, is all about multi-stakeholder partnerships. So Forus is about to launch a new report on SDG 17 during a UN high-level political forum side event. That'll happen next Friday, the 9th of July. And we hope that many of you can attend this important discussion, and we'll put a registration link later for this side event into the chat box. So the question, and first slide, please. The question today really is how to improve partnership working in the 2030 agenda. And as I said, SDG multi-stakeholder partnerships are recognized as a key means of implementation in the 2030 agenda within SDG 17. And civil society is recognized as a core stakeholder within such multi-stakeholder partnerships, along with other sectors such as the private sector, trade unions, universities, churches and faith groups and others. So multi-stakeholder partnerships really are a central element of the 2030 agenda, and this is because they promote a whole of society approach to making the fundamental and urgent transition to sustainable development, which the international community has recognized is so badly needed. And this commitment of the 2030 agenda to multi-stakeholder partnerships isn't just an ideological commitment, it's also a very practical one, because there's so many potential benefits that are linked to these kind of partnerships when they're working well. They bring a diversity of experience and skills from different sectors to the implementation of the 2030 agenda, and they help with cross-fertilization and complementarity. They also add more legitimacy to implementation actions because there's such a wide range of sectors represented in these partnerships. These partnerships also have a much wider reach or outreach than partnerships which just involve one sector. And these partnerships can also promote badly needed systems of mutual accountability between the different sectoral representatives, which can help to build trust and confidence between the partners involved. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be a little bit provocative today and to ask the question really, to what extent we are actually just paying lip service to the concept of multi-stakeholder partnerships. And I'm going to suggest that even CSOs themselves may be paying this lip service. And just the question, how many of our CSO networks are involved in meaningful multi-stakeholder partnerships with other key stakeholders? As I've mentioned, the private sector, academia, trade unions, parliamentarians, church and faith-based groups, national parliaments and local governments, or even new social movements. So how many of our networks are involved in ongoing meaningful partnerships with other sectors? And of course, while there are many kinds of partnerships that range from fluid and informal ones to the more formal ones, I suppose I'm talking today particularly about more structured working partnerships where there are agreed mutual objectives that are being pursued by all partners and clear mutual outcomes are being sought. So an interesting question really then to ask about a lot of CSOs who may not be involved in such multi-stakeholder partnerships is, what are the practical obstacles that are actually preventing them from developing and maintaining these partnerships? So are the obstacles to do with the lack of opportunity to get involved in such partnerships? Or is it a lack of confidence about ability to enter into and to maintain such partnerships? Do many CSOs feel they don't have the capacities or the skills both to establish and to maintain these partnerships? Or is the lack of funding to enable such partnerships, which can be very intensive in terms of human resources, another obstacle? Next slide, please. So I just want to provide one example of a way in which multi-stakeholder partnerships linked, for example, to SDG 16+ and to addressing issues of civic space and promoting a more enabling environment for civil society could be extremely useful. So as we know, there's an increasing trend towards governments behaving in a very illiberal and authoritarian way. And this results in the shrinking and the closing of civic space around the world. So CSOs in many different parts of the world are increasingly subject to restrictions, to control, surveillance, imprisonment, and even murder. They need to build strong partnerships with other stakeholders who see the value of protecting civic space and an enabling environment for civic participation. And these sectors could include the private sector, philanthropic organizations, universities, media, trade unions, churches, and so on. And the point of this is that civil society is much more likely to be able to withstand a crackdown or a sustained attack on it if it has support from these other influential sectors of society. And therefore, forming multi-stakeholder partnerships with these different sectors or involving representatives of these different sectors can make a lot of sense for civil society. Next slide, please. So for this reason, and I'll finish with this, Forus would like to share some of our key SDG 17 recommendations with you today linked to multi-stakeholder partnerships, because we believe these kind of partnerships need to flourish over the coming years. So firstly, we're calling on the international community to place a renewed emphasis on the full implementation of SDG 17, and in particular its commitments to promoting multi-stakeholder partnerships for the monitoring and implementation of the 2030 agenda. Secondly, despite the fact that there's supposedly a review of SDG 17 implementation by the UN High-Level Political Forum each year, this has not yet been done in any kind of meaningful way, and the commitments of this important goal still have to be properly operationalized. So we're calling for a full and proper operationalization of SDG 17 and a meaningful annual review of this goal. Forus has also called for a significant increase in flows of international finance for SDG 17 to support the establishment and maintenance of multi-stakeholder partnerships. And we believe it's important to make the case that these partnerships sometimes form organically, but a lot of the time they do take a lot of work to get up and running and to be structured and planned in such a way that they're going to be effective and that they're going to last. So we really believe that there needs to be more international finance directed at this important commitment within SDG 17 and with helping civil society to engage effectively in these partnerships. Forus has also called for the creation of new digital platforms to support different stakeholders in connecting with each other and connecting with different sectors which have similar areas of interest linked to the SDGs. And we believe that these digital platforms could help different sectors to identify and potentially to launch new multi-stakeholder partnerships linked to different SDG goals and targets. And finally, and importantly, Forus has called for CSOs to have access to ongoing capacity building linked to SDG 17 to support them in establishing and maintaining effective multi-stakeholder partnerships to monitor and implement the SDGs. So that's really the end of my presentation today. Thanks for listening to me and looking forward to a good discussion afterwards. Back to you, Rosaline.
Thank you very much for that energy and very good points that would help us going forward. We will now invite Katrina to come and speak to us around the high-level political review and key messages in 2021. Welcome, Katrina.
Thank you very much. I have a complex topic, Hlpf review and ministerial declaration, and we have a few years of negotiations in this process, but still I will put them in a few minutes, and it's not so difficult, but let me tell you, that's a not good indicator. It means not many things did change. So I will not do it separately, but I will bring some main kind of characteristics of the both. So we started with Hlpf review, I think it was like 2 years ago, but when the COVID-19 pandemic paralyzed the world, and when we started also to think about, well, the consequences and the recovery and so on, we were hoping that this will be additional push for the Hlpf, and that there will be some lessons learned in a very bitter way, of course, but because COVID-19 did expose some structural problems, has some systemic inequalities, and we were hoping really that that will help us to bring more arguments to the review and then really to make some significant changes in the future in changing role or improving the role of leading role of Hlpf. Well, of course, there were some additional elements to mention. There is a so-called social progress index. They came, I think it was September last year. They came with the estimation that we have a delay with already 62 years in achieving SDGs. And we know that SDG 1, 2, and 1, 2, there were delays already before the COVID, and then after the COVID, SDG 3, and so on. So, you know, our impression in major groups and other stakeholders, we took part in many consultations and meetings and so on, and we provided many contributions. But our impression was that, well, they're trying a little bit to hide themselves behind COVID-19, because we knew about those problems even before, but we were hoping that COVID-19 exposed them, so it will be easier to argue for a stronger role of the Hlpf. Some of the improvements have been made. We have to say there were a lot of efforts on improving the way VNRs are arranged and organized and presented, and a lot of discussions about centrality of the human rights and so on. But still, all in all, I would say that not many things did change. And basically, what we still have after the Hlpf review and the ministerial declaration, although it's under the silent procedure, but still we could say that what they are missing is to support Hlpf in providing a leadership role, guidance, strengthening the role, and giving some recommendations. The word recommendation is not used. You will not find it. There are some, you know, endorsement and encouraging the countries and inviting here and there. There is no commitment. There are no strong ambitions in neither of the documents. And the most important effort was really missing, to have Hlpf that will be more actionable, outcome oriented, and will have a stronger role in the implementation of Agenda 2030. So this was our main concern and our main criticism. I have to say that the process was very much supported, and there was really an effort by co-facilitators who were running both Hlpf review and the ministerial declaration, and by several countries. But of course, a lot of resistance was also there, and I believe that's one of the reasons why we did not really move much. We did not change too much. What you can see and read everywhere is like, oh, no businesses as usual will help, especially after COVID-19. So now we saw the problems are even more serious, and we need a transformative agenda and not adaptive one and so on. But still, all the efforts to change more significantly some of the points in the Hlpf review document and in the ministerial declaration were stopped by the simply, we stick to the agreed language. So only minor changes or the changes that were supported by majority of the countries were possible, but any kind of stronger ambitions were stopped by we stick to agreed language. So if you stick to the agreed language and you cannot change the language, how can you change the concepts even? And let me mention just a few of those points. Ambassador Vector, she mentioned already that there were some good proposals, but they were weakened in the procedures. So we have really witnessed that. And some of them were even fully stopped. Gender was incredibly still. Gender was an issue that countries did not agree. Some of the countries did not agree. It didn't want to have a stronger or more ambitious language on that. Human rights, well, now we do have a paragraph on that, but still it's weakened and so on. So that was a long process with, as I said, a lot of meetings and consultations, but finally, at the end, we would stick to the agreed language and maybe just change a few things. What is most important, there is no effort to remove structural barriers that we saw, these systemic challenges, these systemic inequalities, the global power architecture, the financial architecture. So it remained untested. And the changes are, I dare to say, more cosmetical. In spite, as I said, not only our efforts as MGOs, but also several countries that were strong, really supportive in, well, stronger language on gender, on human rights, role of civil society, but it was either reduced or weakened in the procedure. There were a lot of efforts in stressing the interlinkages between SDGs and this, so more integration, and it was accepted, but still there is in the results we do not see much of that. And in spite of the hope and the intention of many countries, also the annual review of the SDG 16 was refused. We were really all supportive very much, and at certain moment it looked like, oh, we will have it, but no, it was refused. So SDG 16 will not be reviewed every year. As I said, an important point, VNRs, and VNRs are already perceived as a weak moment in the Hlpf, and it's supposed to be a learning exercise, a place to exchange, really, to have some lessons learned, and based on them, you know, to formulate maybe some, well, recommendations or something. So there were a lot of discussions on that, like, oh, there should be more time for VNRs, more exchange, more time for meaningful questions, not only, you know, just formally one or two, but finally at the end it will be more or less the same. I'm afraid it will be again, you know, touristic presentations or you know, shows showing the beauties of the country as some of the countries did in the past. So this was a bit disappointing moment. Some of the discussions were around connecting more global, regional, and local level, and so the role of the regional commissions. So I think it's still in the discussion because, as I said, ministerial declaration is still open, and there might be a space in it to improve that, but still a bit weaker than we were expecting. And of course, the critical point, and again, it was mentioned by Ambassador Vector, was this role of the civil society. After a lot of backsliding and pushing back and so on, at a certain moment, we were in a situation that we have to defend the position that we are already having and that is guaranteed by the resolution, so, and not improving further. And although some countries were supportive, and it's included in the text that countries are encouraged, it's not recommended, but encouraged to include civil society representatives in the national consultations and so on. still we are somehow, well, more tolerated than invited to speak, I would say. And it seems that still we will, in most of the sessions, we will stick to the 3 minutes speaking slot, which is very often reduced to 1 or 2, which really does not enable, it's not even the good start for some meaningful exchange or an open dialogue that would address more important questions. One of the points that we were also insisting is that our reports of major groups and other stakeholders, our reports and our contributions are made available to the countries, translated, published on the web page, which is currently not the case, only the summaries. But we also do not have access to the national reports. So, okay, it's really a lip service. So dialogue should be there and we should exchange and so on. But the contributions of major groups and stakeholders and contributions of the member states' national reports, they are not available. So how can we have a dialogue if the main points are not available? So and not on the official web page, and they're not accessible. So these were just of the few points, but I would say the main issue is that the agenda is, that's confirmed by the Hlpf review document, and it seems that ministerial declaration will also be the same. There are some improvements. The efforts of the partners who took part in the consultations were obvious. Of course, civil society and major groups and other stakeholders were pushing a lot. Some of the countries were pushing a lot, but we still have an Hlpf that is not providing a strong leadership role and recommendations, and not substantial input from other UN bodies and from other partners, and not action oriented and achievable outcomes. So thank you. Over to moderator.
Thank you very much, Katrina, for giving us those very insightful areas that we still are struggling with since we began the negotiation. And also now the implementation. Now we will not have a question and answer. I request you to put our level best to answer. And now I will call upon Sarah Brandt from Global Focus to just give us a brief around follow-up on unmute civil society. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the organizers of this important meeting, and of course everyone here today. Yes, my name is Sarah Brandt, and I'm from Global Focus, which is the Danish platform for NGOs. And together with many of you for a year now, we have worked around the hashtag unmute. And I think Ollie will just share 2 slides with you all now that I have prepared. So throughout this past year, we have had several UN meetings that were virtual, where we saw that civil society were not meaningfully included. And so for that reason, I'm so happy to have seen the amazing mobilization from civil society groups from all around the world. And also at Hlpf this year, as we just heard from Katrina, there are many issues still going on in terms of ensuring meaningful participation of civil society. And so we have created this logo, which we hope that you will all share with us and act together to really highlight the issue of how Hlpf could be much more inclusive of civil society from around the world. And so if we go to the next slide, what we would encourage everyone to do, if you'd like to highlight this together with us, is to use the logo or that we have made here, but also any other photos and media that you find relevant, and then use the hashtag #UnmuteHLPF. And this, we hope, will be a hashtag that will be used by many allies around the world to really put light on the need to have everybody included, also from a perspective of leaving no one behind, from a perspective of digital divide and inclusion, etc., that is really needed in this virtual participation that we're all part of. And as Mandeep said, it really gives the opportunity for all of us to be included so much better, because we don't need to pay for a plane ticket, we don't need to have a visa and all of these other things in place that have been a barrier in the past. But what we see is that there's still so many barriers to the virtual participation. And what we have seen also in the past UN meetings that were virtual has been that it is not only up to the UN institutions to ensure participation, but also very much up to the individual member states. And so we have just highlighted 3 recommendations that could be given to member states. First is to make spotlights report by their own national civil society easily accessible and push for other states to do the same. Deliver better virtual participation of civil society. And lastly, establish HLPF spaces at subnational and national levels where civil society can actively engage in the virtual HLPF. And UN member states can coordinate the SDG Forum civil society platforms in establishing spaces to access internet, also tackling the digital divide. So what I just wanted to lastly say is that there has also been a draft letter developed, kindly by Action for Sustainable Development, that gives all national civil society organizations an opportunity to write to their national government and encourage them to join the Unmute initiative and specifically sign on to those recommendations that we also heard Marie-Louise from the Danish government present earlier, these recommendations for a more inclusive UN that has been signed by around 50 governments and 300 civil society organizations. But we can do much better, because this is a need that is so big, as we've also heard from many of the other speakers today. So we will launch Unmute HLPF today. Please join us and please use it throughout the next several weeks so that we can ensure that our voices are heard, that there is a need for better virtual participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you also for giving me this opportunity to facilitate. And over to you, Ollie. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosaline, and thank you again to all of the fantastic speakers that we've just heard from. I think it's very clear that there is a huge demand from so many of us across civil society to ensure that voices and views of civil society can be properly heard at the HLPF. And I think this has been a really great opening and introduction to some of the key issues that are coming up at the moment. So for the second half of the session, we're aiming to try to enable a bit more interaction. We know that many of you are on so many of these Zoom calls, and so we have created a forum where actually the second half of this hour will be workshops where we can break out into groups and we can discuss what's happening in different countries. But to help us to set the scene, we have a number of key countries, civil society coalitions, and also the government of Indonesia, to just give us some initial insights into how the process worked at the national level. So now we've talked about the kind of macro picture. Now let's really get into how does it work at the national level? How can we build dialogues in preparation for the VNRs? How can we make sure that civil society is included as effectively as possible in those dialogues, so that by the time we come to the VNRs in about 10 days time, there has been that process of engagement and consultation and dialogue. So we're going to hear from 4 examples: Indonesia, Denmark, Zimbabwe, and Mexico. And I would just encourage each of the speakers just to keep to 5 or 6 minutes. I'm sorry that it's a very tight time frame, but we want to be able to have time in the second half to be able to break out and have further discussion. So first of all, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Vivi Yolaswati, who's the chair of the Indonesian SDGs Secretariat. Thank you so much for joining us. And I believe we have a few slides of yours to share.
Thank you, Ollie. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon as well. Oh, you already shared my slide?
Here we go.
Okay, thank you. For Indonesia, the Voluntary National Review has been a third time for us. Please, next slide. Okay, so in 2017 and then 2019, the report has been part of one of the best in some part. I mean, like in 2019, it's the best report for the goal 16, and also we have been quoted for the best VNR for the financing as well. Next, please. So the framework that we built upon the theme of the sustainable and resilient recovery is actually based on the reform that has been done by the government to tackle of the COVID pandemic, as well as to start the economy recovery. So first of all, some reforms that happening this year is for the social protection system to tackle the increasing of the poverty and also the unemployment and the inequality. And then the national health system, inevitably, of course, there are some challenges, particularly in the lagging behind places. But in fact, when we are talking about vaccine access, we are also tackling or have a challenge in educating the goodness of the vaccine in order to build the herd immunity. We actually have already secured the access for around 181 million people. But then the progress of the vaccinate rate is very low. Up until now, it's only 11%. So part of the challenge, including giving a good perception or understanding to the people as many as possible. Of course, we have to reform our disaster system to include also the non-natural disaster like the pandemic. So in this regard, we also include the adaptation for the response, like how to build the more adaptive social protection, and also meanwhile we still have a challenge to mitigate the climate change. Later on, for the economy recovery, we start to build more green economy. So in these days, there are more and more initiative or best practices that we learn from many stakeholders on the circular economy, for example. And of course, the means of implementations and the enabler is always the case, how to build the VNR more implemented, well taken. Next, please. So the process itself, I would say that it's very inclusive. It took around 4 months, involving 4 platforms of the SDGs. Not only the government and the local government, but also the parliament and also the Supreme Auditor Agency. They are reviewing the accuracy and the consistency of the data and also the information, the updates for each goals, and reviewing the due process of all meetings and also other means of engagement for the 4 platform. The other platform, including also the academician, expert, and also the philanthropy and the businesses, and for sure for this with the CSOs and the media. We also collect the good practices from all stakeholders. Within the 4 months, we could collect like 200, and almost 60% of it is already included in our VNR. That's why it's quite big, because everybody want to be recognized for their initiative during the pandemic. So based on the process, Oh, one more thing. In the process, we also involve the public consultation through online, and also include youth, some marginal group for discussion. Next, please. So based on those process, we highlight the new and emergent challenge, the needs for the redesigning the economic transformation that are more inclusive and sustainable. That's why for the next government working plan, we include this 6 strategy that we mentioned, not only the vaccine as a game changer, but this strategy also to put a strong basis for economic transformation after the COVID. So that's including the circular economy, blue economy, digital transformation, and the a new capital as a new source for the growth, particularly for the eastern part. I think that's next, please. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for those very clear points around the actual process that you implemented. I think we just have time for just very short remarks from the civil society coalition that was also there in Indonesia. Denisa from INFID, if I can ask you just to limit yourself to just 1 or 2 minutes so we have time for the other countries. Denisa.
Sure. Thank you so much, Oli. Am I audible? Okay, so thank you so much, Oli, and mohon izin Ibu Vivi. Firstly, we would like to congratulate Indonesia for the submission of the 3rd VNR, and we appreciate the government has provided space for us as civil society to collaborate actively. INFID itself has participated in the consultation since the kickoff of the VNR until the public consultation of the VNR process. I think 3 highlighted points that we would like to highlight of Indonesian VNR. The VNR actually recognized the more profound the inequality, the more anecdotal the data is. So this is actually a very important point, since in the COVID-19 pandemic, it is very impossible to create a very concrete data, because there is a limitations in terms of access of technology, and actually one point that is very important as well. The VNR also quote a research and studies by non-governmental organizations, including Transparency International and INFID itself. So the studies of INFID, research INFID on the impact of COVID-19 towards civil society organization have been referred in the explanation of Goal 16. So this is something that we need to appreciate more. And also we as a civil society coalition also voice out that it's very important for the government to create a more balanced report, and also human rights perspective. And as a follow-up, the Indonesian government actually, the VNR have been reviewed by UNOHCR in terms of human rights perspective. This is something that is very important as well for Indonesians follow-up in terms of the creating of the 3rd VNR. However, we actually create a people scorecard funded by Action for Sustainable Development as well. And one of the result is there are a lot of local civil society organizations have not been involved in the preparing of VNR. So this is something that we need to improve more in the future in terms of localization of SDGs. And there is also one thing in terms of the critical engagement. I think it's very important for civil society to have evidence-based data and also story, because it's very difficult for us to contribute actively without this evidence-based data and story to be included in the VNR process. So this is something that we need to highlight. Thank you, Oli. I'm so sorry if I've talked too fast. Yeah.
Well, I hope it was okay for the interpreters, but I certainly understood you, and thank you also for being concise and for highlighting particularly that point about data and inequalities and how we actually identify where those gaps are. Thank you so much. So moving now to some other examples. So I think we've heard some strong commitments from the Danish government. So I'm really pleased that we also have Caroline from Global Focus to talk a little bit about the VNR process there in Denmark. And again, if you have some key messages, what have you really learned from it? What have you, what would you like to share that you think works well for other countries? Caroline, over to you.
Thank you, Oli. Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. Thank you so much for arranging this call, and also thank you for letting me highlight one engagement process that has worked well here in Denmark. As Marie-Louise stated in the very beginning, we also from civil society very happy for the close collaboration we've had. though I must admit that it has been a quite slow start and not a very high political priority in the very beginning. And therefore, what we did in Danish civil society was that we decided to break the silence back in October. And instead of waiting for government officials to take the lead, we invited government officials to 3 informal and online roundtable meetings, one with focus on leaving no one behind, one with focus on building back better and greener, and one on monitoring. And we really wanted to create this very informal room where civil society actors gave input, and where we afterwards had a dialogue with room for questions and with room for knowledge sharing and international examples, and on what were good examples and what had not been done yet. And this was really a kickoff for a very informal conversation. And also we wanted to show that we could actually give solutions. So we really wanted to feed in with solutions to the forthcoming process. So after the 3 roundtable discussions, we gathered all the materials from the webinars and made a wish list from civil society, one with nice to have, one with need to have, one with nice to have, with concrete actions, both politically and also from civil society, and what we can do in collaboration with each other. And this involved, for example, civil society assessment of all 17 goals in the Danish VNR report. It was 2 public hearings, one with specific focus on leaving no one behind, a holistic focus on leaving no one behind, and so on and so on. And also a concrete monitoring cycle in the action plan and in the VNR report. And I am convinced that this solution-based approach has been key in our close collaboration with the Ministry of Finance and the government in whole. And this informal dialogue that we've had throughout the process, and also where we've made room for, as I've said now, where they could call us if they had questions. So also that gave us the opportunity to see a draft version of the action plan and to feed into the VNR report with the important themes and so on. So I believe that the kickoff webinars has set the stage for a very good collaboration in Denmark. Thank you.
Wonderful. That's a really interesting approach there, that you've come up with that, as you said, like a wish list of the key areas that you want to feature, and then working through those with the relevant ministries. It sounds like quite a strong process for engagement, and perhaps one that other countries might want to also pick up on. So the next speaker will give us more of a perspective coming from the African continent, from Zimbabwe. We know that Zimbabwe hosted the regional forum also last year, and it seems there's been some interest there. Judith, would you be able to give us some insights on what's worked and where some of the gaps are for Zimbabwe?
Thank you very much, Ollie, and thank you for having me and some colleagues from here who are also joining online. I think let me first start by giving the context that Zimbabwe presented its first voluntary national review in 2017, and the civil society organizations who came together under the banner of the Civil Society Reference Group on SDGs. At that time, we also contributed to the process, but our engagement process was very ad hoc, I must say. And this year, the government is presenting its second voluntary national review. We are again contributing as civil society through that process. And also maybe to mention that in both times, in 2017 and currently, the government has engaged a consultant to come up with the voluntary national review. So the process is very rushed, and as civil society, we also had to run with that kind of pace. So reflecting on the two processes, 2017 and the current one, what we see as having worked for us now is the use of the people's scorecard, both as a tool, but we also want to look at it as an approach for contributing towards the process. The use of the people's scorecard provided a systematic way of reviewing the SDG progress from the civil society perspective. Like I said, in 2017, we rushed into the process because we didn't want to be left behind. We wanted our voice to be there, but it was very ad hoc and somehow uncoordinated. So how the people's scorecard has worked for us now as an approach is because it then helped us to train the civil society reference group members who are a multi-sectorial representation on the scorecard. So we are systematically collecting the data that then we use to assess the progress from our perspective. And we also then trained even members through the non-governmental organization association membership. So that then provided both a broad coverage of civil society and a consensus building from our perspective. And we made government aware that we were coming up with a spotlight report because we didn't want them to feel like we were ambushing them or we were using the report to antagonize them. And there was a receptiveness from government to the extent that they kept on saying, don't ambush us, please give us what you are coming up with. So government was actually expecting civil society input in that way. And having laid that ground of having trained the civil society representatives, because during this time of COVID, the training was online. So the Apex organizations who represent the sector organizations were then able to cascade the process to their membership, to the ground level, through the training and through getting data from them to populate the scorecard. So in that way, it then helped to reach a wider range of civil society organizations. But we were also able to use mixed methods. Well, for the most part, it was the online, but at some point we had a reprieve in the country where even the COVID-19 restrictions were somehow loosened. So we're able then to do physical meetings. So the combination of using online methodology and using physical consultations then helped us to consolidate information that came from civil society. And I'm referring to the people's scorecard both as a tool and an approach because it then helped us to provide immediate contribution because the consultant was running with producing the report. And as soon as we had data from civil society, we were able to then share that data with the consultant who immediately incorporated it into the government report. And in our view, we feel that this process has really worked for us. It has made it easier for us as civil society to have a consolidated position, unlike in 2017, to then be able to provide our position and our assessment of progress on the SDGs with government in a more consolidated manner. And also what is good is government has been waiting for that information from us because they didn't want us to ambush them. And we think it has created a harmonious kind of working environment between ourselves and government. So really, in my view, this time round, we are looking at the people's scorecard both as a tool and an approach that has worked for us and which we want to continue to perfect on, to use as a way of engaging a government and influencing the VNR process, because we have observed the report that came that it has more of our contribution than compared to the 2017 process, because it was easier for the consultant to use the information that we gave. Not only did we give scores, but there were also narratives that were consolidating and explaining why the score was given in the manner that it was given. So on that note, Oli, I think that's our experience in Zimbabwe. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Judith. And it's a really good point you highlight about the second time round and the learning that there is from one experience to the next. And I think we'll hear a lot about that this year, given that so many countries are coming to their second or even third time VNRs. So I think that's a really good learning and how you built that experience. So the final country that we just wanted to highlight this time around is from Mexico. And I believe we'll be hearing in Spanish. So make sure you're using the interpretation box at the bottom, as was highlighted before. And so this will be Laura and Roberto speaking from the Mexican perspective. Laura, por favor.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Hola, buenos días a todas, a todos. Oli, muchas gracias por crear esta posibilidad de intercambio de distintas experiencias de participación de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil en el proceso, digamos, de integración de los informes nacionales voluntarios. Como dijiste, vamos a hablar dos personas de dos organizaciones que hemos estado activas animando la participación de las organizaciones en este tercer informe voluntario y último que presentará nuestro gobierno. Decirles a ustedes que somos parte de un espacio de organizaciones de sociedad civil, que estamos articuladas desde que se debatió la agenda, que la hemos dado seguimiento y que hemos estado generando desde entonces distintos ejercicios de participación y de posibilidad de incidir en la implementación de la Agenda 2030. El caso mexicano, es complicado explicar cómo ha sido nuestro proceso porque hemos tenido dos gobiernos desde que se aprobó la agenda. Entonces el segundo, el actual, ha cumplido el día de ayer 3 años y por lo tanto hemos tenido que realizar un ejercicio de reanimación del diálogo entre gobierno y sociedad. Según entendí cuando conversamos con Oli, nos parecía que era importante compartir en este foro lo que ha sido justamente esta última etapa de participación de cara, digamos, a lo que ha sido el ejercicio de integración del Informe Nacional Voluntario, que ha tenido características distintas a las ocasiones anteriores, aunque siempre hemos participado. En esta ocasión, digamos, tuvimos la posibilidad de ser parte de un ejercicio, digamos, novedoso, en donde la integración del informe pasó por varios momentos. En primer lugar, decir que sí hicimos una calificación, digamos, que favoreció, que nos propició Action de los ODS en México, y en esa calificación de los ODS el país no sale bien aprobado, digamos, y bien calificado, porque digamos que son pocos los ODS en los que se ha tenido progreso. No quisiera detenerme en ello. Después hicimos, junto con el gobierno mexicano, esta experiencia. El gobierno decidió integrar a 9 sectores y entonces nos dio la posibilidad de que uno de esos sectores fuera las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, no de una manera, digamos, fácil, porque tuvimos que insistir y ejercer un poco de presión para ser parte de uno de los actores o sectores de ese, digamos, comité, y ya entonces incorporadas las organizaciones, hicimos una consulta consensuada con gobierno, un núcleo de organizaciones de sociedad civil, cerca de 80 organizaciones que tuvieron la posibilidad de evaluar el progreso de la agenda en nuestro país, pero también de hacer, digamos, propuestas y de plantear, digamos, algunas exigencias y demandas de una participación más cualificada y una participación más sistemática, que no solo se quede en las coyunturas, que no solo se quede, digamos, en los ejercicios eventuales que se hacen de consulta, sino que realmente la opción que se nos abrió de dar de nuestro punto de vista respecto a lo que pensamos que ha sido la implementación o el progreso de la agenda, abra un camino, una ruta para continuar, digamos, trabajando y participando. Entonces hicimos esta consulta, Roberto nos va a hacer favor de comentar un poco más sobre ella, y también realizamos otro ejercicio con un grupo focal de organizaciones para integrar lo que llamamos, como en muchos países, informes alternativos o informes espejos, informe luz, como así le denominamos en México. Este es el segundo realmente que realizamos en esta etapa que se aprobó la Agenda 2030, y en este informe luz, pues ahí también hacemos, digamos, una valoración más cualitativa, más que cuantitativa, de lo que ha sido la estrategia nacional, los medios de implementación que el gobierno ha previsto para la participación, cómo hemos sido o no incorporadas las organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Esta experiencia es interesante después documentarla más porque ha sido con altibajos. No todo el gobierno ejecutivo nos abre la puerta para la participación, ha sido focalizado realmente en el Ministerio del Exterior, en la Cancillería mexicana y en la presidencia cuando tenía la responsabilidad de la agenda. Ahora la tiene un Ministerio de Economía, pero digamos que la posibilidad de participación tiene mucho que ver con la voluntad, el respeto, credibilidad que tenemos con ciertas dependencias de gobierno. Así que, pues sí, reconocemos que Cancillería ha sido digamos, un ministerio clave para que nos dé la oportunidad. Tuvimos posibilidad de opinar sobre la declaración ministerial y tenemos ahora este informe que les comento que de consulta que será incorporado en el Informe Nacional Voluntario de Gobierno, en donde estarán incorporados los 9 sectores que hicimos parte de este ejercicio, digamos, de consulta y luego de incorporación de nuestras valoraciones, de nuestras propuestas y sugerencias de cómo seguir en adelante, digamos, con un cumplimiento de la agenda pues más efectivo, un gobierno que tiene, digamos, realmente sí mucho interés en generar política pública para acabar con las desigualdades. Ahí hay, digamos, decisiones interesantes que ayudan a la agenda, pero no es un gobierno que haya asumido la agenda como tal en su visión integral. Necesitamos trabajar en ello. No tenemos tampoco una transparencia adecuada y nuestros mecanismos de participación tienen que mejorarse todavía mucho más y no son solamente coyunturales. Entonces participamos en el informe, generamos un informe alternativo, calificamos los ODS de otro lado y fuimos parte de este comité. Entonces, perdón, para darle oportunidad a Roberto, que también su organización junto con la mía, que es Equipo Pueblo, hemos sido las organizaciones, digamos, animadoras o facilitadoras de este proceso, que sí vale la pena reconocerlo como una buena práctica. Ya, Roberto, perdón.
Muchas gracias, Laura. Hi, everyone. I will participate in Spanish, so if you want to change the challenge, because my intervention will be in Spanish. So, bueno, gracias por el espacio. Soy Roberto y colaboro en una organización que se llama The Hunger Project. Somos una organización internacional con presencia en 22 países del mundo y nuestra misión está basada en poner fin al hambre y a la pobreza con una metodología que llamamos desarrollo liderado por las comunidades con perspectiva de género. Como decía Laura de Equipo Pueblo, y a quien agradecemos además desde THP México por habernos invitado a este espacio, Equipo Pueblo y THP México somos dos organizaciones que estamos en un mecanismo formal del Gobierno de México, y quisiera platicarles 3 cosas. La primera es sobre algunas recomendaciones importantes que emergen de esta consulta nacional que hicimos. Un poco bueno, ya decía las recomendaciones y también ¿qué sigue después de este proceso de elaboración de informe? ¿Qué sigue en México y que sabemos que va a estar sucediendo? Como ya decíamos, la consulta se hizo alrededor de 80 organizaciones en el país es un número importante, considerando que estuvieron en distintas partes de nuestro país. Y bueno, algunas de las recomendaciones principales tienen que ver con la alineación de que el gobierno federal debe todavía alinear sus prioridades y los proyectos y políticas en relación con los documentos y los estándares internacionales de los que México hace parte. Hay un llamado importante a que se refuercen los compromisos de los gobiernos locales en materia de Agenda 2030, que es un tema que salió muy recurrentemente en la consulta, el trabajo en lo local, fortalecer la arquitectura institucional de los gobiernos locales y los gobiernos municipales, y también la reestructuración de las políticas públicas con una perspectiva de derechos humanos, con una perspectiva de género, de diversidad sexual, intersectorial, y también en el ámbito de financiamiento internacional a gobiernos federales, locales y a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, pues hay un llamado que tiene que ver con generar esquemas de financiamiento desde los distintos niveles de gobierno, con la participación multiactor, fortalecer mecanismos de cooperación con entidades internacionales que permitan el financiamiento para el desarrollo eficaz, un ordenamiento y normatividad fiscal favorable para las organizaciones, porque en el país hay un contexto complejo sobre nuestra condición fiscal que el gobierno de México ha impulsado, pero también, como ya decía Laura, pues el fortalecimiento de los mecanismos de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Uno de los momentos importantes que viene ahora para México, una vez que hemos organizado esta consulta, es importante decir que esta consulta que hicimos y estas recomendaciones van a estar dentro del Informe Nacional Voluntario del Gobierno de México. Es decir, nuestras recomendaciones de sociedad civil van a ser parte formalmente de este informe que nuestro país va a presentar. Después del foro político de alto nivel, o bueno, más bien dentro del foro político de alto nivel, Equipo Pueblo, Laura y su servidor de Hunger Project México, somos parte de la delegación oficial de este foro político de alto nivel del gobierno de México. Y esto es importante porque vamos a tener la oportunidad de acompañar lo que el gobierno de México diga en el foro político de alto nivel, y también vamos a tener la oportunidad de mantener estas recomendaciones de sociedad civil desde una perspectiva crítica sobre lo que tenga que decir el gobierno de México. Por último, cierro diciendo que en el país se va a hacer una presentación oficial del Informe Nacional Voluntario. Las organizaciones de la sociedad civil hemos hecho un llamado porque esta presentación oficial se va a hacer después del foro político, y hemos hecho un llamado para que bueno, ya no va a haber próximas ocasiones porque es el tercero, pero sí desde una reflexión de que hubiera sido interesante e importante que se presentara previo al foro político. Entonces, esta presentación va a suceder después del foro político de alto nivel, en donde estará la Secretaría de Economía, que es la responsable, la representante del Estado máximo que coordina los esfuerzos de la Agenda 2030 a nivel nacional. Y allí tendremos la oportunidad, Equipo Pueblo y The Hunger Project México, en poder participar a nombre de la sociedad civil y mantener nuestra visión y nuestras recomendaciones. Muchísimas gracias y perdón si me extendí con el tiempo, pero gracias y les mandamos un saludo. También está nuestra directora Montserrat acá en la sala, entonces les mandamos un saludo. Muchísimas gracias, Laura.
Muchas gracias a ustedes. Está muy fuerte. It's very much appreciated, and I think it's very clear that there's been a strong engagement across so many different parts of civil society in Mexico, and really it's a process of strong dialogue, and we hope that it continues to enable those voices to be heard in spite of changes, as you highlighted, between where the government ministry, the relevant ministry that is responsible for the agenda, and making sure that there's that continuity in terms of the national planning. So thank you all for these excellent opening presentations, giving different perspectives from each continent on countries that are presenting this year on the VNRs. I'm very conscious that we would like to have time for the breakout discussions. So while the last panel has been going on, we've been allocating people to breakout rooms, and I hope that this will work now. We do have some who are going into a Spanish-speaking group and some going into a French-speaking group, so we've clearly marked those, and we hope that we've identified most people who would like to join each of those. I'm going to, we've also got some key colleagues who will help to guide the conversations in each of those breakout rooms. So welcome back. I see people starting to come back. I hope that the breakout rooms worked okay. Great. I wish we had more time. There's never enough time on these sessions. But welcome back to everyone as you come back. Just have another few seconds while they close. And then we can hear some final reflections. Okay, welcome everyone. I think everyone should be back in the room now. Thank you all, and I hope that those breakout rooms worked okay. I know it's a tricky balance in the virtual space, and we have colleagues joining from so many different contexts and so many different backgrounds. So thank you all, and it's great to be able to have that opportunity to share. In some ways, this session actually allows us to do more sharing than we might do in New York. I think as colleagues have highlighted, where normally we would have visas and challenges around travel and so on, whereas actually this time we've been able to bring everyone together from your own comfort of your own space. So that's the one potential benefit that we can learn from. So coming back now as a group in our final few minutes, it would be wonderful to hear from the groups if you have just a few thoughts, closing thoughts on some key learnings that you've shared on the VNRs, particularly around how we embed change at the national level, but also if you have any gaps that you feel that still need to be filled that haven't been identified. So I'm going to stop the screen share so we can see each other now, and I would like to welcome anyone who would like to then feedback from each of the groups. So we had 9 groups in the end, so if there's someone who's been identified in each of those groups, please go ahead, please raise your hand or let us know. Please go ahead.
Hi, Holly.
Please, Tola. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So.
Oh, sorry. Is that Oyebisi?
Yeah,
apologies. Oyebisi,
yes.
Please.
Yeah, that's fine. So in my group, there were suggestions around thinking through how we can adopt the Human Rights Council's model or process, where that can be used for the VNR system. There's also the learning around. So countries are always just reporting only when they're doing VNR. That's where you hear the VNR language. However, how can we localize the VNR such that when the country is not presenting, VNRs are also happening technically in terms of reporting back to citizens on the SDGs. The Kenyan model sounds interesting and promising, where whether the country is going to VNR or not, every 2 years there's a progress report on the attainment of the SDGs in the country. There are also conversations and suggestions around the need for us to mobilize for there to be the Office of a Civil Society Envoy that could then help us to bring civil society's input into some of the UN processes. So these are some of the thoughts that came from my group.
Excellent. And if we can encourage everyone who was active in each of those groups, the moderators, if you have any notes that you were able to take during the session, please do send them over to us so that we can include those. Yes, I see also we have Tola this time. I thought I did see your hand before. So we'll come to Tola and then we have Gabriela and Inesa.
Yes, I think my group was an interesting group really. Beginning from Norway, where we have very good example. There was inclusion of the stakeholders this year, according to them. The inclusion was good. But the only comment they have is the issue of not enough information actually from government side. But as far as civil society is concerned, they were actually involved to some extent. Now from even South Africa too, something that stands out is the issue of the working group. The working group was organized around the individual goals, really. So which actually gives so much attention to each goal. And, you know, invariably, there's no way you are going to miss any goal. That means all those goals are important. Then maybe beyond that, we look at the issue of how can the VNR actually lead to long-term policy change for the 2030 agenda. And we have a very good example of there's a need actually to be doing follow-up. Immediately after VNR, there's a need to follow up even with the government. There's a need even to organize a program around the VNR. And even during Hlpf, civil society should always be organizing a sort of memorial of the beginning of the inception of Agenda 2030. So which is good because this actually puts government on their toes once they are hearing about the issue of VNR. So I think now for Kenya, it seems attention was actually paid even to older people, even though according to them, the attention was not paid enough to some other critical stakeholders like maybe grassroots people. So this was also stretched during the conversation there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tola. Thank you. And I'm having a reminder that we really don't have much time, I'm afraid. We're already running over time and we can't keep the interpreters too long. So I'm afraid we're just going to take the next two interventions, the hand raise, and then we'll have to wrap it up. But please feel free to keep adding your comments in the chat. As I see, we already do have a number coming in. So Gabriela and then Inesa.
Muchas gracias, Oli. Voy a hablar en español. Nosotros hemos tenido en nuestro grupo países como México, Guatemala, Colombia y Perú, y ahí se ha resaltado mucho la importancia de que las organizaciones de la sociedad civil participen en espacios institucionales promovidos por el gobierno, como ha sucedido en México, con la finalidad de hacer de este proceso sostenible. Lo otro que también se ha mencionado es que todavía en América Latina y el Caribe, las organizaciones de la sociedad civil que venimos participando en este tipo de procesos de seguimiento a la Agenda 2030, todavía son un grupo pequeño de organizaciones. Entonces, todavía es necesario que se fortalezcan a las organizaciones para que participen, pero también para que estas organizaciones tengan como parte de su agenda la posibilidad de entablar diálogos y alianzas con otros espacios, ¿no? Que es algo que a veces no sucede como agenda específica de las organizaciones. Algo muy recurrente ha sido también la observación acerca de que lo que se reporta como parte del informe voluntario no es aquello que sucede en la realidad. Y hemos tenido ahí la experiencia de Colombia, que nos ha manifestado que, por ejemplo, en el informe se establece que existe una plataforma multisectorial que no funciona. Sería lo ideal que esta plataforma funcione, pero lo cierto es que en la realidad no se da, ¿no? Entonces todavía hay este gran reto de que lo que se reporta por los países sea realmente lo que sucede en la realidad, y ahí las organizaciones de la sociedad civil tenemos un papel clave para hacer que estas diferencias sean visibles y cada vez sean menos, ¿no? Y otro tema importante es que si bien muchas veces se consulta a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil para que formen parte o den sus aportes en estos informes, esta participación no es sostenida, sino que sobre todo es coyuntural para algunos temas en los que seguramente los estados consideran importante tener el aporte, pero no es que sea institucionalizada y sostenida. Y ya para finalizar rápidamente, sí hacer mención que en nuestros países, en América Latina y en el Caribe, las crisis políticas son determinantes para impedir que la Agenda 2030 pues, pueda desarrollarse con una visión a largo plazo, precisamente por todos los cambios constantes que hay en nuestros países. Muchísimas gracias, Oli.
Gracias, Gabriela. Y muy importante este punto de el proceso a largo plazo. So the longer term change that we really need to see. Thank you. And the reality on the ground is so essential. So thank you so much, Gabriela. Inessa, the final reflections to you, please.
Thank you. We were quite a diverse group. As global citizens, we didn't ask each other where are we from, but we know that we were practitioners from local, regional, and international level who did not have experience with VNRs. So we focused on the second question. 3 points from us, how to lead for real change with VNRs. First, explaining SDGs before asking opinion on them, and actually NGOs can play a very important role in this process by workshops and trainings. The second, VNR is two-way process, because also communities learn what services they can ask from governments and use VNR as advocacy tool. And the third, VNR should speak the language of people and be related to people's lives. So thank you for my group for these wonderful common points and your interventions, because we all spoke and that was very nice. Thank you.
Excellent, Inessa. And that's a brilliant point to end on in terms of bringing the VNRs into a language that many more people can understand. And I think it's often the case that we speak within quite a technical space on sustainable development, and it's really essential that we find ways now to bring it to a more mainstream audience. How do we communicate better those changes that we want to see? So I want to bring us to a close now. I'm very conscious of the time, and in order to do that, I just have a few closing points that we wanted to share with you on behalf of all of the organizers. And this is really just to give you some pointers on how you can continue this dialogue, because we know that today has been, you know, we've had 2 hours, but the time goes by so quickly, and we want to make sure that we can continue to be working closely with you over these next 2 weeks during the HLPF, and really making sure that wherever possible, we're bringing the voices that you all are able to connect with and represent into the key meetings that are coming up. So one thing I wanted to highlight is from the NGO Major Group. There will be a side event next week on Tuesday, the 6th, right at the very beginning of the official program of the HLPF, reimagining the future we need. And that's really highlighting key partners from across the NGO Major Group looking at a healthy, green, and just recovery. And the other element that the NGO Major Group has created to enable some informal interaction for those of you who might wish to be in touch outside the official events, because we know it's much harder in the virtual space to have that informal interaction. Actually, Marie-Louise Abschagen, who's from the German platform, has found an amazing online format, which is called Wonder Me. And using Wonder Me, we're going to create a virtual Vienna cafe or an online SDG community meetup. And those will be happening on Tuesday and Friday, and then the following Monday, always at 7 a.m. New York time, which for those of us in African or European or Asian time zones is later in the day, but it gives us a chance for us to connect informally. There's no agenda. Anyone can join and simply connect with others who are attending the HLPF virtually. So we'll post those links in the chat, and we'll make sure we send them in an email afterwards. And then finally, I wanted to highlight a number of key events that many of the organizers of this event are involved with. So on the 7th of July next week, there will be a session with ActionAid, which picks up some of the points around the Unmute campaign. Global Focus, Forus, GCAP, and others are also involved. Then we have a side event on the 8th of July with the government of Norway, and that will be looking specifically at this question of VNRs. So please do join that one. And that's something where we're very glad that I think Sondra, who I hope is still on the call from the Norway Forum, is speaking, as well as the Norwegian government, the Colombian government, and the Malaysian government. So that will give us a chance to really look at those questions in more detail. Then on the 12th of July, Forus have a session on towards an enabling digital environment. Many of us will also be part of that one. And then finally, after all the VNRs happen in that second week, we aim to have another session like this where we can reflect together on what's happened over the 2 weeks of the Hlpf, and we can share some thoughts on what might be the future steps towards September and towards the coming years to make sure that we actually deliver on what's been promised in the SDGs. So those are our key points. We hope that you've all been able to get something out of this conversation. It's been a very, very rich discussion. And I would also like to thank once again the co-organizers of this call from CIVICUS, from Forus, from GCAP, and the NGO Major Group. I think it shows that the interest and the enthusiasm from so many parts of civil society has been extremely powerful and heartening. Even though we can't physically meet, we can certainly keep in touch virtually. Please do let us know if you have any other events that you would like to share. And there is a Google Doc open also by the NGO Major Group where any side events that are being organized by any NGO can be shared, and we can make sure that they are promoted, even if they're not directly on the official program. And finally, also thank you very much to the interpreters who have made this possible and who have kept going with us throughout this slightly extended slot. And we really appreciate all of the support. It makes it much more of an inclusive dialogue. So if you'd like to say goodbye, please feel free to open your mic, and we can say goodbye to each other and hope to see you all soon.
Ciao.
Bye.
Salam.
Bye. Abrazos.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.